Hi, thank you for joining me. Welcome to the Retro Shed. Now, I consider myself to be quite lucky to have been born in the early 70s, if you can believe that. It was the dawn of a new era, not just of video game technology, but also the era of the whole concept of having a computer in the home. Now, every kid wanted one. It was an exciting time to be alive. It was new and it allowed you to play some of the incredible games that we were starting to see in our local video game arcades. Let's face it, every kid wanted to be able to play the games at home. A whole raft of home computer machines came onto the market around about this time, and whether they were a success or a complete flop, what was interesting was the fact that they were all different, and that's why I love them so much today. I used to love visiting my friend's house and playing on their machines and vice versa, and it was fascinating to see how the same game played across all the different computers. Unlike today, where we all have a PS4 or an Xbox or a PC or a Switch, we pretty much know how they're going to play. But back then, you could go around somebody else's house and see the difference between, I don't know, Elite or Boulder Dash on the BBC, and how it played on the Commodore 64 and how it played on the MSX. Of course, at school, the main battle lines were drawn in the playground and you were either on the ZX Spectrum side or the Commodore 64 side. But of course, there were a whole raft of these computers that sat between the two. They ranged from pretty successful machines like the BBC Micro, which of course were only owned by the rich kids. You had the Acorn Electron, which was essentially a baby stripped down Beeb. You had the Amstrad 464, the CPC 464, which of course came out a little bit later than the rest of them. You had the Atari 400 and 800 models, and you had the underdogs like the Oric, the Dragon 32, or the Texas Instruments, which I don't think anyone that I know at school actually had one. But of course, the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64 reigned supreme, and they literally carved up the market in the UK between them. Now, I know I'm going to get some hate here, but you know what? I never really wanted a ZX Spectrum. For some reason, I think it was the little case, its squishy rubber keys, the fact that you needed to plug a joystick into an interface and then into the Specky itself, the little bleeps and blops that came out from its internal speaker. It just didn't appeal to me. The Commodore 64 represented everything I wanted in a home computer. It had a beautifully designed case, just like the VIC-20 that came before it. It had a proper keyboard. The sound came out of the TV, for God's sake. And it had tons of ports for you to plug joysticks into and cassette decks and all sorts of stuff. It was just so nicely built. Now, I know the price was quite a bit of difference. There was a lot of difference in price between Specky and Commodore, but I had my heart set on one. Seeing a Commodore 64 for the first time was like the opening of the briefcase in Pulp Fiction.
We happy? Vincent!
I just want to state for the record though that you cannot state how important Sir Clive's computers were to the UK and global home market. What that man and his company did was just incredible, and for the price the Spectrum was an absolutely outstanding machine. Now, I'm actually a backer for the Spectrum next, so I can't wait for that to arrive, and the latest news is that the keyboard has been green lighted, so I'm not holding my breath. But I do think we are nearly there, and it does look so goddamn gorgeous. I mean, just look at the thing. Can't wait to get my hands on this machine. I've got games here waiting to play on it, but I haven't got the machine to play on it. For those of you watching this channel, really, is there anything I can tell you about the Commodore 64 that you do not already know? Right, so let's dive in. Now, there are so many games from the Commodore 64, I don't even know where to begin, to be honest with you. There's loads. So what I've done, I've just grabbed 3 games that immediately spring to mind when I think of the Commodore 64. I'm taking a look at Raid Over Moscow, Warhawk, and IK Plus, International Karate Plus. Just 3 of my favourites. There are plenty of games to choose from, but these are 3 that I just want to have a quick look at. Yeah, Raid Over Moscow. Now, this takes me back. This was released in 1984 by US Gold, who was quite a big publisher back in the day for the 8-bit scene. And the developer was Access Software. Right, I'm sure many of you played this before. So the idea of the game is that basically the Russians are going to launch some missiles against the northern United States. You have to get into your aircraft and go and blow the hell out of the launch sites. So here you just have to fly over the landscape, destroying various objects and avoiding the missiles that keep coming at you every few minutes. And don't fly into an object like I just did. I mean, you look at this game, it's so simplistic, but it was also so entertaining. It was great fun to play. But looking at it now, I suppose you can say that looks a bit sparse. I don't know. And again, you can just blow up the launch control in the middle of the screen there. Don't worry about the ones to the left and the right, unless you particularly want to, of course. That's Leningrad dealt with. And now, approaching Moscow. So I'm not sure what building that is supposed to be. The State Historical Museum, apparently. And you've got what looks like a mortar of some kind, and you have to take out and cause as much damage as possible and blow up some doors. So those doors at the bottom, one of those doors has to be blasted. And it's randomly chosen, apparently. Right, third stage. Now this is some kind of nuclear reactor. And you have to destroy these maintenance robots here that are apparently feeding water into this reactor. Now, you have discs. So you have to bounce the disc off the back wall and somehow deflect it onto the robot. And it's not easy. It takes a bit of practice. You have to get it right at you have to get the correct angle to actually bounce it onto the robot's back. There you go. So you have to take out a few of these. And I think you've got 2 minutes to do it, if I remember rightly. Okay, so that was the reactor going up. So that's all the robots defeated. The reactor now explodes, and that, I believe, is it. There you go, Raid over Moscow. What a cracking game. Still enjoy playing that today. Brilliant. This is Warhawk by Proteus Developments, and I quite like this. It reminds me of a number of different games. It's a horizontal shooter, and I love a good shooter. This is from 1986. Soundtrack by Rob Hubbard. Makes brilliant use of the synth chip, this, and it just reminds me of Uridium an awful lot. It's very, very chunky graphics, fast and frantic gameplay, and it's a good job that you've got shields really in this game and not just get taken out with the first hit, because you really wouldn't last very long. It does get pretty hectic in a minute. That score's a bit big, isn't it? That's a massive score there at the bottom of the screen. You can't miss that. It also reminds me of an arcade game called Star Force. I don't know if you've ever played Star Force, but it looks a bit similar to this. So this game was compared quite heavily to Uridium when it first came out, and you can see why. Cracking Commodore 64 chunky graphics. Yeah, this looks very similar to Star Force, doesn't it, in the arcades? It handles sprites and scrolling very, very well. For some reason, the enemy seem to be firing rocks at you. They look to me like rocks anyway. They're slinging rocks at you, guided rocks as well actually, because the rocks do tend to follow you around the screen. And at the end of each level you get this manic couple of seconds where everything is thrown at you at once. I mean, it's just crazy. IK Plus, well, what can you say? It's got to be one of the greatest beat-em-up games ever made on the Commodore 64 and the Amiga and the ST and a lot of other platforms besides. Developed by Archer McLean, of course, and released by System 3. I believe this was 1987. And the whole aspect of having 3 players instead of just one-on-one, it adds a completely different dimension to the game. Yes, it is. There you go, 1987. Having 2 people to actually fight really, really changes it up. It's tough. It's not that easy at all. I think I broke a joystick on this game, actually. Music again by Rob Hubbard. It's just brilliant. I mean, just look at it. I've got the Amiga version, which I've got to admit is my favourite, and it has slightly more detailed visuals, of course, as you'd expect, and the music on the Amiga version is outstanding. But this is absolutely brilliant. It still looks fabulous. Love this game. I mean, the collision detection on this is absolutely spot on. If you miss, it's your fault. It's not the computer's fault, it's your fault. And when you get it absolutely bang on, there's no better feeling than taking them both out like that. And they didn't even get a hit on me. It's so good, this game is. Oh, that's embarrassing. That's really embarrassing. You can tell I'm used to the Amiga version. I'm trying to think of an excuse now. Yeah, it's because I play the Amiga version and not the Commodore 64. Oh dear. I mean, this is lacking the sound effects you get on the Amiga version. I love the sampled sound effects from the Amiga version when you're fighting. I do believe that most of the sound effects were taken from Enter the Dragon, and it just sounds brilliant. When you're punching and kicking and knocking people out, the sounds are amazing. And you compare it to the Amiga and ST versions, which of course look more polished. Most of the essential things are there. I mean, you've got the sunset, which I always thought looked wonderful. It's a really good looking game, this. Really like it. I mean, there's so many games on the Commodore 64 to look at. You can't do it justice by looking at these 3. Yeah, I just wanted to revisit some games on the Commodore 64. So there you go. We've just had a look at Raid Over Moscow, Warhawk, and IK Plus. Thank you very much for joining me once again here in the Retro Shed. We will be catching you soon, when we'll be taking a look at something else. God knows what. I haven't decided yet.